Now, which is the smartest deer to hunt? Which is the hardest deer to hunt? Which is the wisest? You know, between a buck and a doe, just looking at old buck, old doe, they of course both, number one, have the same brain. You know, they both have the same intelligence level. And in fact, when it comes to producing great genetics, 50% comes from the doe, 50% comes from the buck. So intelligence is the same. And even the attributes of large antlers, large bodies, 50% of that comes from the buck as well. So pretty equal when it comes to that. And I want to discuss the differences between a bow or a doe and a buck, because they really lead to decisions you should be making in the woods and how you should hunt and how they can help you develop your hunting strategy and really, like we'll talk about in a little bit, just cover your lowest hole in the bucket. So I'm going to just look at both. Number two, herd mentality. What does that mean? Does and fawns think in herd mentality. Does think in herd mentality. Fawns just follow the herd. So when one reacts, they all react. They run to one side, they run over this side. A lot of times you'll see them even in a giant food source. Same doe family groups are coming out to the food source. They get spooked on one side of the field. They just move over to the other and come out at the same time. They're herd mentality. They have a very short window of movement. And it has nothing to do with being smart. It just simply has to do with their herd mentality. They want to be right next to their food. They're thinking bedding and food all day long. They're very territorial. They pick the closest food, the closest bedding area to the food source. You typically hit the best food source in the area. And if there's not enough food or space left over, does rule the roost. So that's very true. So when you think about that, does overwhelmingly take over food sources, bedding areas. They take over space. For example, if you have 15 does, you have 30 acres and there's not a lot of cover, and those 15 does and fawns are living in that 30 acres, probably no room left over for bucks, let alone mature bucks, because the older those bucks become, the further they want to live away from that chaotic mess of a bunch of does and fawns. And they'll move far and wide to find an area that isn't overrun by does and fawns. So the old thought, the old school way of thinking that more does equaled more bucks couldn't be further from the truth. You want balance. Because if a land doesn't even attract does and fawns, it's certainly not going to attract a mature buck. But when a buck comes to the land, he's not coming there because of the does and fawns. He's coming there despite the does and fawns and the fact that it's good habitat. It's good cover. It's good bedding. It's good food. That's why he's there. And he's there because there's enough space left over for him. And if there's not, he will not be there. Does and fawns think in herd mentality. They're used to living and acting as a herd. I talk about herd mentality, meaning the wildebeest that jump into the river and the crocodiles eat them. That's does and fawns. They all do the same thing. The whole herd is going across the river and they're going right here. And just a small percentage of them get picked off every year. But it's carnage and they don't care. They just all move there. Mature buck is an independent thinker. Number three here. He relies on himself. He relies on one person. Think about it, he started out in a bachelor group, and he might still be during the summertime, but when it comes into the hunting season, his friends are dead. He's 5, 6 years old. He doesn't have a lot of buddies. We have a cool video that we just picked up this morning. It was of 2 bucks, one we call 45, one we call Bo. They're both 5-year-old, and they're both traveling together. It's funny how bucks that you never see travel together in the past, all of a sudden hook up and they're traveling together like buddies during the summertime. It's out of respect. They know it's not herd mentality. They don't want to be around a bunch of 1.5-year-old, 2.5-year-old deer bucks that are running all over the place and acting fruity and flaky and really acting unnatural as far as it relates to these mature bucks that are acting with caution, moving slowly. They're not dancing and prancing around and running all over the place. They're making very calculated movements in everything they do. And for that, the older they get, the fewer friends and buddies they have. All their bucks that they grew up with, they were raised with, at that age, they're gone. And so when they get to that age, they're an independent thinker. They're used to surviving on their own. And for that, they have to make all their decisions that have kept them alive to 4, 5, 6 years old pretty much on their own. They can't rely on a bunch of eyes, ears, noses. They have to do it on their own. And for that, they become very wise and they've become very intolerant of pressure. They also get pushed to the side because, again, those does and fawns are herd mentality. They want to be close to the food. They take over the best cover, the best bedding, and what's left over for those mature bucks, that's what they take. They're off to the side by themselves, and they end up inhabiting very remote locations. And that's why too, if there's a lot of does and fawns in there, they just leave. And that's not what this is about. We're talking about the intelligence level, which one is wiser. Lowest hole in the bucket. And this is something as it relates to your hunting. You know, lowest hole in the bucket is if you manage your hunt. We talk about a buck being a one sense animal, meaning that if he sees you, smells you, or hears you, he's gone. He doesn't give you a second chance. He only needs one of those. A fawn needs all three. They want to see you, hear you, or smell you, and then they might leave. Does typically stomping at you, they see you in the tree, they pick something out, and then they go downwind of you, and then they go. That's a 2 sense animal. Bucks are 1. They're the lowest hole in the bucket. If you plan your hunt and your strategy, your access, your departure out of your stands, and where you're sitting, where you blow your wind, and where you blow your scent, around where bucks hunt, for one thing, but around a mature buck, meaning you're trying not to spook them, then your hunt is easy when it comes to does and fawns and young bucks. It becomes very, very easy. Even a mature doe, even the oldest doe in the area. Because again, they're herd creatures. They think and act as a group. They want to be as close to the food source as they can. They're very, very reliable on hitting their favorite food source an hour, 45 minutes, half hour before daylight, the end of daylight, in the afternoon. So very, very predictable, very short movement, just a fraction of a movement of a mature buck. So when it comes to hunting in general, if you plan your hunt around does and fawns, well, you might always be chasing your tail when it comes to mature bucks, because mature bucks act and think completely different than does and fawns. They're almost different creatures. If you look at it that way, if you plan your hunt around that, then it becomes a lot easier for you. Best indication your hunting practice needs to change is that mature does on your land or where you hunt, public land, private, are very hard to hunt. It's because they've been pressured. Because if they haven't been pressured, they do the same dang thing every single day. You can almost rely on them to hit a certain food source. If it's a good night, real cool, calm conditions, they'll hit that an hour before dark. If it's a really stormy night, windy, and we're not talking extreme blizzard or thunderstorms, but it's a little bit warmer, high winds, well, they might hit it at dark, but they're going to be there within an hour every single day, and they're going to come out of the same exact location onto the food plot, and you can almost set your clock to it and your watch to it if it's a nice night. They should be there. If there's not, something went wrong. So when your does are hard to hunt, that tells you something's going wrong. They're being pressured in some way because they do the same thing every single day, and you can count on it. So if they're not doing the same thing, it's only because of you or a neighbor that's onto your land. Because even 40 acres, 30 acres, 20 acres, if you have cover here and you have food there, and those does and fawns are there and they're hitting that food source, they'll do it every single day regardless of what's going on in your neighbors. That's why just with 20 to 40 acres, you can be a herd influencer. Because if you hold that pocket of does on your land and you have enough depth of cover left over, 200 yards, 300 yards behind those first layers of does and that food source, then you have enough room for a buck, older buck or two, to hang out on your land. That depth of cover is so critical, and that depth of cover is something that most properties don't have because they have does and fawns, they don't have good cover, they hunt pressure it, and then there's really nothing left over for a mature buck. And that's why very few, I want you to be part of the 5% club, but less than 5% of all landowners actually attract mature bucks to their land on a consistent basis because they're applying too much pressure. And that's not like an advanced hunting strategy. This is like black and white stuff. This is something, whether you're new or an old hunter, you've been around for a long time, you have many decades of seasons under your belt, that's pretty basic stuff as far as how to hunt. As far as if you're spooking does and fawns, you don't have a chance on mature bucks, because the does and fawns, again, if they're easy to hunt, it tells you something's going good in your location. So what does this all mean? What does it all mean as far as how it relates to your hunt? Well, of course, you always plan for shooting mature buck, even if you don't have them. Then the hunt becomes easy. It becomes, if you want does and fawns and you're hunting a 4 or 5 year old buck, the does and fawns are easy. You should be able, when it gets to that point, even on public land, most public land areas, it's pretty easy to go out and find does and fawns that are in a consistent pattern and take advantage of that pattern. But when it comes to bucks, mature bucks, not the case. Even when you have the best of circumstances to go, I'm going to go shoot this big buck, and you do so at a rate you can shoot does, that doesn't happen. Mature bucks are a different creature. They're a lot more whimsical. They can choose to go here, there. They're always going to go find that best food source in the moment, as long as it's not hunter pressured. So if you think of remote areas for bedding in the morning, you think about, you need a lot of cover to funnel a mature buck to a food source in the afternoon. Think about hunting good cover, good funnel movements. Think about if I was a mature buck, would I be caught dead out in this area? Would I choose to move through this area? If it doesn't seem thick enough for a mature buck, it probably isn't. So think about that. Where have you seen mature bucks moving in the past? I'm not talking about being pushed or driven. I'm talking about naturally they were moving in this area. What do they use? What kind of lay of the land did they use? They move on the low side of the ridge, the high side, were they exposed or not? Was it in thick cover or not? If you make those decisions of what would a mature buck do? Why would he be in this location? Ask yourself those questions. And then you really look at it that he is a one sense animal. You can't afford to make any mistakes. That affects your access. That affects if he's downwindy on stand, if he can hear you or not. If you hunt like a true predator, you hunt in locations where you expect a mature buck to be, meaning not out in an open food source, but actually on the way there, 200 yards away, 100 yards away, right before dark, or on the backside of his bedding in the area in the morning as you're walking well around his preferred food source than he might be at night, waiting for him to come back in the morning during a cold front, late October, November, whenever that pre-rut hits in your area into the rut. Then who cares if a mature buck or a doe is smarter than each other, which one's the smartest? They're both the same. The bottom line is you have to hunt, even if you're hunting does, young bucks, if you hunt like you're hunting a mature buck, hunting gets a whole lot easier for you. It helps you to avoid some of the pitfalls that most hunters make when they enter the woods this fall. Folks, I want to make sure you check out my web class video series, whether it's how to design your food plot program or how to design your property in general. And we have a new one coming out that'll be how to hunt the rut. But these bucks back here are a testament. Some of these bucks go back to 93. They're even in different states. I urge you to check out those web classes so that you can help yourself, help your land, help your hunt. The link is in the description. And also for those that have tried them out, I encourage you to offer some feedback in the comments below. Thank you.